"Pretend you love me for 10 minutes," said the CEO. What the single dad janitor did stunned all. The glass walls of the 43rd floor in Manhattan glowed against the midnight skyline, the city lights stretching endlessly like a sea of stars. Inside, Eleanor Hayes, one of the youngest self-made millionaire CEOs in the country, stood alone in her corner office. From her window, she noticed the janitor again, the same man she had quietly observed for weeks. He worked with a steady rhythm, not rushing, not dragging, almost as if each sweep of his mop gave him a moment of peace. His presence carried a quiet dignity that she envied, even though he pushed a cart most people never looked twice at. That night, loneliness pressed heavier than usual. She had a charity gala the next evening, the kind of event where investors expected stories of love, family, and stability, not a woman who went home to an empty penthouse and ate takeout in silence. Desperation made her do something reckless. She stepped out of her office, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, and walked toward him. He looked up, startled, his hazel eyes sharp and curious. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His voice was polite, steady, carrying the tone of a man who had learned to measure words carefully. "I need to ask you something," Eleanor began, forcing herself not to falter. "Tomorrow night I have an important event, and I need you to—" She hesitated, knowing how absurd this sounded. "Pretend you're with me. Just for 10 minutes. Pretend you love me." The janitor, Daniel Brooks, set down his mop slowly, studying her face. Once, he had been an aerospace engineer with dreams larger than the sky itself. Now he was a single father, working night shifts after a lawsuit, and tragedy had stripped everything away. Yet in Eleanor's eyes, he saw the same emptiness he carried. And though her request was outrageous, he couldn't bring himself to dismiss it. 10 minutes? He repeated, his voice low, almost disbelieving. She nodded, her perfectly steady exterior cracking for just a second, enough to show the fear beneath her confidence. And in that fragile moment, the distance between the millionaire CEO and the night janitor began to collapse. The next evening, Daniel hardly recognized the man staring back at him in the mirror. The tailored navy suit Eleanor had sent fit as though it had been made for him, sharpening his features and making him look like someone who belonged in a world he had never even imagined himself standing in. His daughter, Lily, had clapped her hands when she saw him dressed up, whispering that he looked like the dads in movies. That thought stayed with him as he walked into the marble lobby of Hayes Enterprises, feeling like he had stepped onto a stage without a script. Eleanor was waiting near the private elevator, and Daniel almost didn't recognize her either. Gone was the corporate armor of dark suits and perfectly controlled expressions. Tonight, she wore an emerald green gown that caught the light with every movement, her hair cascading in soft waves over her shoulders. For the first time, she looked less like a business headline and more like a woman carrying the weight of the world. "Ready?" she asked, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. He adjusted his tie nervously. "What's our story?" "We met at a coffee shop," she answered quickly, her lips curling into a practiced smile. "You were reading about engineering," I asked a question, and one thing led to another. "We've been together for 2 months. If they ask about the future, just say we're taking it one day at a time." When the elevator doors opened, a glittering ballroom unfolded before them. Crystal chandeliers, tuxedos, and designer gowns as far as the eye could see. Daniel felt the weight of every curious glance, but Eleanor slipped her hand into his. Her skin was warm, trembling just slightly, and somehow that simple touch steadied him. At first, he thought this was just an act, 10 minutes of play pretend, but as they moved through the crowd, smiling and laughing together, something unexpected happened. For Eleanor, it wasn't just performance anymore. For Daniel, it wasn't just survival. Somewhere between the introductions and the laughter that slipped out unplanned, pretending started to feel dangerously real. The morning after the gala, Daniel returned to his night shift, pushing his cart through the silent hallways as if nothing had changed. Yet everything inside him felt different. He caught glimpses of Eleanor behind her office glass, once again dressed in her sharp business suits, her expression cool and unreadable. But now he knew what her laughter sounded like when it wasn't rehearsed. He knew the way her hand fit in his, and that knowledge made the distance between them feel unbearable. 3 days later, she surprised him. Instead of sending the expensive suit back with security, Eleanor came down herself, dressed in jeans and a sweater, her hair loose, as though she was trying very hard to look like just another woman. She held the garment bag out awkwardly, but her eyes lingered on his face, searching for something. "I thought I should return this in person," she said, her voice quieter than usual. Before Daniel could answer, Lily ran up from the lobby table where she often did homework after school. She looked curiously at Eleanor, tilting her head the way children do when they're deciding if someone is safe. "Daddy, is this your friend?" she asked, her small voice breaking through the formal silence. "This is Miss Hayes," Daniel replied gently. "She works upstairs." Lily waved shyly before returning to her crayons. Eleanor followed her, crouching down to look at the paper. It was a picture of a big house with colorful windows, but only one figure standing inside. "That's my castle," Lily explained, "but it's lonely." Eleanor hesitated, then smiled softly. "Maybe the person inside just needs to open the door." Lily thought for a moment, then added a wide doorway with light spilling out, announcing, "There, now people can visit." That innocent drawing struck Eleanor deeper than she expected. For the first time, she saw not just Daniel's resilience, but the little world he and his daughter had built together, one filled with warmth she had never known. And when Lily turned to her and said, "Miss Hayes, you should come to dinner with us," Eleanor felt something stir inside her that no boardroom victory had ever given her. The fragile beginning of belonging. The following week, Eleanor's carefully balanced world began to crack. Her CFO, Richard Hale, a man who had been circling her position for months, entered her office without knocking, carrying a leather portfolio and the smug expression of someone who thought he had already won. He laid out a series of photographs across her desk. Grainy telephoto shots of her walking beside Daniel, one of her stepping into his modest apartment building, and worst of all, a picture of them kissing in the narrow hallway outside his daughter's room. "This is what the board has been discussing," Richard said coldly, leaning back in his chair as though savoring every word. "Our investors won't tolerate this kind of entanglement. A CEO caught in a relationship with a janitor who has a past. You're jeopardizing the company's image. End this now, or face a vote of no confidence." Eleanor's hands tightened around the edge of her desk, but she forced herself to remain calm. She asked for time. 48 hours to make her decision. But as soon as Richard left, she realized the choice wasn't about the company or the board. It was about the kind of life she wanted to live. That evening, she met Daniel at a small diner on the corner of his neighborhood, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and fried food, where nobody cared about last names or net worth. She told him everything. The photos, the ultimatum, the risk of losing her empire. He listened silently, his jaw tightening as her words unfolded. Then, instead of anger, he surprised her with something far more painful. "You should choose the company," he said softly. "I won't let you throw away everything you've built for someone like me." His words were meant to protect her, but they cut deeper than any boardroom threat. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt powerless, not because of corporate politics, but because the one man who had seen her for who she truly was had just walked away. And in that moment, she began to realize that losing him would be far worse than losing everything else. Monday morning arrived with heavy rain pouring over Manhattan, the kind that blurred the skyline and made the city seem smaller, quieter. Eleanor stood before the mirror in her penthouse, her business armor in place. Black suit, perfect hair, flawless mask of control. Yet behind her reflection stretched a life that felt hollow. A home with no laughter, no warmth, just silence. She thought of Daniel's small apartment filled with photographs and Lily's colorful drawings taped to the fridge, and for the first time, she saw clearly what real success looked like. In the boardroom, Richard sat confidently at the head of the table, already speaking as if her chair belonged to him. The directors waited for her decision. Eleanor, calm but resolute, laid down her own portfolio. Instead of resignation, she presented proof of Richard's misconduct, illegally obtained surveillance, falsified background reports, and evidence of his attempt to manipulate the board. By noon, Richard was escorted out, and by afternoon, the directors voted unanimously to keep her as CEO. She had protected her company, but victory felt strangely hollow without Daniel beside her. Later that day, fate placed them together again outside Lily's school. The little girl ran toward both of them, her small hands grabbing theirs as if she could hold the world together on her own. "Daddy," she said firmly, "I told you Miss Hayes would fight for us." Eleanor looked at Daniel then, and he finally let his defenses crumble. Weeks later, in a cozy suburban home with a porch and a backyard, Eleanor found herself cooking pancakes while Lily practiced piano and Daniel fixed a wobbly table. She still ran a multi-million-dollar company, but her greatest achievement was not on Wall Street. It was here, in a house filled with love. She had asked a stranger to pretend for 10 minutes, but what she discovered was a lifetime. Because the true American dream was never about skyscrapers or headlines. It was about finding a place and people worth coming home to,